Hi again. This is What is the Constitution by Patricia Brennan Demuth. This is lesson 4, Limping Government. Now we're into part 2 where we're actually going to read the chapter. So I suggest you go find your copy of the book. It'd be a good idea to have it. It helps to look at the pictures especially. And then make sure you have make sure you have your brain plugged in, please. So we're going to turn right to the first page here, Chapter 1, A Limping Government on page 6. I just want to remind ourselves that when we previewed this section, a question that we had was, what on earth do they mean by a limping government? That's just such an odd thing to say. So hopefully we'll find that answer out as we read. So read along. In 1787, the United States of America had a name, and it had a flag. Oh, and there it is. Yet many things were missing to make it a true nation. There was no president. There was no central court system. Neither was there a U.S. Army or Navy. There was no Senate or House of Representatives, only a weak Congress. Congress could pass laws, but it could not enforce them. For instance, Congress could charge taxes to pay off war debts, but it had to rely on the goodwill of the states to pay up. It had to rely on the goodwill of the states to pay up. That is interesting. So goodwill is when people are making a choice to do the right thing. But it had to rely on the states wanting to do the right thing to pay up. Oh, okay. So people's loyalty to their state made it hard for them to think of themselves as Americans. During the Revolution, George Washington asked soldiers from New Jersey to swear loyalty to America. What an odd request. They said that New Jersey was their country. So apparently that's what's going on in this picture, is that this person here in the center, this is George Washington, General George Washington, and talking to this soldier here, and perhaps he's asked him to swear loyalty to the United States, and the soldier has said, "General, but I'm from New Jersey." Loyalty to one state was rooted in history. The 13 colonies had been settled at different times by different groups of people. Each state developed its own way of life, often with its own religion and customs. Strict Puritans had settled New England. Peace-loving Quakers founded Pennsylvania. Oh, now I understand this picture. Something that I know a little bit about is that this is a Quaker church service, that these are Quakers. This is a religious group that settled in Pennsylvania. And part of what makes their church services a little different from other church services is that there's not really anybody in charge. Everybody is considered equal in the church, and that's why they face each other instead of a front of a church with an altar or a person in front of the room. And then part of what happens at a Quaker church service is that people sit there silently and pray. And then when they feel that God has spoken to them, then they'll speak out to the entire group. And so people will take turns speaking and listening to each other. So that's what this picture apparently is. Although the main language of the colonies was English, tens of thousands spoke German in Pennsylvania. Shopkeepers and fishermen thrived in New England, whereas the South was mainly agricultural. Oh, agricultural, that's got the agriculture in it. So agriculture has to do with farming. So whereas the South was mainly agricultural, that has to do that the South was mainly a place where they did farming. The Articles of Confederation held the states together well enough to fight the war, but afterward, each state was happy to go its own way again. Soldiers returned home, and each state got busy creating its own constitution and electing its own leaders. Its own constitution states, oh, well, yeah, Oregon has its own constitution. Every state has its own constitution, so that makes sense now that I think about it. But what about being a country? Some leaders, like George Washington, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton, read about him in the last lesson, wanted the United States to be a strong nation with a solid central government, one that would oversee all the states. These leaders were called nationalists. But other leaders wanted power to remain with the states, just as it did with the Articles of Confederation. The Articles promised that the states would remain sovereign. Huh? Sovereign. Okay, wait, what's that mean? That meant, oh, okay, the author's going to tell us. Sovereign, okay, there's the word. That meant each state was still its own boss. Okay, I'm going to back up, reread that. The articles promised that the states would remain sovereign. That meant each state was still its own boss. Okay, I get that. What about the Union? The articles describe the Union loosely as a league of friendship. How well did this government work? Not too well. By 1787, America's troubles could fill a long list. So we're going to skip this part since we read it already. Some states charged fees on goods bought in other states as if they were foreign countries. Oh, that's called a tariff when you tax things that come from another country. All right. Lands west of the original 13 colonies were being settled, and disagreements broke out over which states controlled them. Continental money was all but worthless. Oh yeah, that makes sense. We saw that these were dollars and this one's shillings. Continental money was all but worthless. So several states printed their own paper money, but it was no good outside of their boundaries. Continental, that's kind of an interesting word. It's got the word continent in it. And so continents are big areas of land like North America or South America or Europe or Asia. And so continental money refers to money that was in the United States. This is to be contrasted with like European money. Okay, so when they mean continental money, they're talking about in where the 13 colonies were. Continental, so moving on to the next paragraph. George Washington, back home in Virginia, grew alarmed at what was happening to his country. Congress is a half-starved, limping government, he complained, always moving on crutches and tottering at every step. Limping government, all right, so it's from George Washington, so he's the one that said that, and he said, Congress is a half-starved, that's not good. Limping government, he complained, always moving on crutches and tottering at every step. So half-starved means you're really in bad shape. You haven't eaten in a long time. Limping, always moving on crutches and tottering. So tottering is like when you're walking, but you might fall over at any moment, like a toddler. They're often tottering. So this is quite a picture now. I understand George Washington was trying to say here. Also, in 1786, a crisis broke out in western Massachusetts. Many poor farmers were losing their land because they couldn't pay their state's high taxes. Under Daniel Shays, a former Revolutionary War captain, a mob of 2,000 farmers decided to rebel. They marched to Springfield armed with axes, pitchforks, and old muskets. So one thing that you might not know is that Springfield is a pretty common name in the 50 states, and there is a Springfield, Massachusetts, just like there's a Springfield, Oregon. They marched to Springfield armed with axes, pitchforks, and old muskets. So that's what's going on here. These are farmers, I suppose, and they're marching to Springfield. The weak Congress couldn't put together an armed force. So Massachusetts sent in its own troops and stopped the rebellion. So this is a rebellion that's going on here. In the end, 4 men lay dead. Shays' rebellion shook the nation. Americans were killing Americans. I am mortified beyond expression, said George Washington. Mortified, oh good, I'm glad they said that. That's a cool word. Mortified means very, very embarrassed. Alexander Hamilton had this to say, there is only one remedy, to call a convention of all the states, and the sooner the better. Oh yeah, remedy. Remedy is like if you're sick, it's something that would help you feel better, like medicine. So there is only one remedy, to call a convention of all the states, and the sooner the better. If the government wasn't made stronger, it could fall apart. Even Congress agreed that the Articles of Confederation needed changes. So it asked the states to elect delegates to attend a special meeting in Philadelphia in May of 1787. Newspapers called it the Grand Convention. So there's our newspaper calling it the Grand Convention. No one called it a constitutional convention, of course, because who knew that a whole new constitution was about to be written?